Welcome to the Over 50 Health and Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin English. I'm a certified personal trainer and nutrition coach, and my mission is to help you get into the best shape of your life, regardless of your age, so that you can show up in life as the healthiest, strongest, most vital version of yourself. I want to let you know that if you enjoy this podcast, I have additional free resources over at www.silveredgefree.com. There you'll find my mini guides on nutrition, exercise, and lifestyle. Today we have another edition of the Coach's Corner, so no guest today, it's just me, and we'll be back next week with our regular interview format. Now here's what we're going to cover in this episode. I'll start out with a brief discussion of how things are going with my new client, Broc. If you're not familiar, Broc is a podcaster himself. He's the host of the Midlife Mastery podcast. And he's hired me as a personal trainer and nutrition coach, and he suggested that we share our journey on our respective podcasts, me from the coach's perspective and Broc from the client's perspective. He's on a journey to get into the best shape of his life in his 50s, and he'd like to lose about 40 pounds and regain some of the strength that he had when he was younger. I cover most of this in the first two editions of the Coach's Corner, so today we're going to pick up where we left off. After that, we'll discuss some common reasons for workout injuries and then dive into some ways to strengthen your core. Spoiler alert, we won't be spending a whole lot of time talking about crunches. And then from there, we'll discuss the importance of healthy fats and then move into a brief review of a book called Thrive State by Dr. Kien View. And then finally, we'll wrap up with some of my takeaway thoughts from some of the recent podcast guests, and I'll give you a preview of some of the guests that I have coming up in the next few weeks. Okay, I'm ready if you are. Let's do this. Okay, where we left off with Broc was about 3 or 4 weeks into Broc's program, and he was doing great. He'd lost some weight, and he was happy to be moving some weights again. And then he had one of those weeks, the kind where everything goes off the rails. First off, he took a week of vacation because his mom was coming to visit, who he hadn't seen since COVID started. And while this was a good thing, vacations and family visits usually disrupt our routines. And then a day or two later, his college-age daughter goes into the hospital and ends up having emergency surgery. And now I'm happy to report she's doing much better now and is on the road to full recovery. But now we have Broc. He's out of this new healthy routine that he's starting to establish, and things get crazy stressful with his daughter going into the hospital. And if that wasn't bad enough, he tweaks his back trying to get a workout in. When it rains, it pours. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that you know exactly what this is like. Pretty much every human who's been alive for 50 years has experienced some sort of back pain. We've all come up against hardship in one way or another. We've probably all come up against some sort of sports injury at some point in our lives. I know I certainly have on multiple occasions. But for Broc, this injury came at a horrible time. Not that there's ever a good time to be tweaked or to get hurt, but he had a lot on his plate at the moment. And Broc was very disappointed, understandably so. He was making such good progress, both nutritionally and with his lifting, and now he just had this horrible week. His daughter got sick, and with his mom visiting, he was out of his normal eating routine, and now his back was tweaked. He was experiencing a setback, and pretty early on in his renewed fitness journey. Now, if Broc had a competition or, say, a model shoot coming up in the next month or so, we might have been scrambling madly to do some serious damage control. But Broc is what Dr. Jonathan Sullivan calls an athlete of aging. He's training to tackle midlife, to reach and maintain a goal weight, and to be strong, fit, and capable for whatever the second half of life throws at him. So let's just assume for a minute that he lives to be 100. That makes his timeline close to 50 years. So in the big picture, a setback of a week or two isn't a complete catastrophe. But before we talk about how Broc handled this setback, let's take a minute and explore how we get injured working out. We get hurt for several reasons, but the primary culprits are improper loading, improper movement, muscle imbalances, muscle weakness, inadequate warm-up, overuse, and overtraining. Let's pick each one of these apart a little bit. Starting with improper loading. Improper loading is pretty straightforward. This is when we attempt to lift more than our bodies are prepared for. And there's a number of reasons we do this. Inexperience, perhaps, or maybe we're just trying to keep up with the guy or the gal next to us, or maybe we're going for that 1 rep max and we're not quite there yet. Improper movement is often related to improper loading, but this refers to lifting with poor form. As soon as we load a hinge or a squat movement, let's say a deadlift or a barbell back squat, we need to be very conscious of our form. And the heavier that load gets, the more critical this good form is, and paradoxically, the harder it is to maintain. So, for example, I know that when I get to heavy conventional deadlifts, I have a tendency to let my hips rise up too fast, too early in the lift. So if you can picture this, I'm set up perfectly for my heavy deadlift. The barbell's right over my midfoot, my core is braced, in fact my whole body is tensed, and I've taken all the slack out of the bar. I clear my mind, I take a deep breath, and I will my hips and my shoulders to rise at the same rate until the bar reaches about my knees. But we've got a problem. Somehow my shoulders moved up maybe an inch or so, but my butt somehow shot up 12 inches. So that I'm now basically in a Romanian deadlift position. Now, a Romanian deadlift is a perfectly fine exercise. I love them, do them all the time, but the problem here is that I'm not loaded for Romanian deadlifts. I'm loaded for heavy conventional deadlifts. And in that split second, I have a decision to make. I can drop the weight, rest and try again. That would be a smart thing to do. Or I can gut it out. I mean, the barbell already came off the floor, right? The hard part's done. Remember, my shoulders moved up an inch or two, and I can try and muscle that barbell up to full lockout. The heck with it. I'm going to throw caution to the wind. I got this. I decide to continue. And as I continue, the strain moves from my hamstrings to those relatively small lower back muscles, and I'm now at that critical juncture. If I can manage to keep a perfectly neutral spine, that is, not allow my spine to round or flex under this heavy load, I stand a decent chance of coming out of this unscathed. But alas, this load is too heavy, my form breaks down, my spine rounds just a little bit as I stand this thing all the way up into full lockout. I did it. I made the lift. Maybe it's even a new PR. But I know almost immediately that I'm going to pay. There's this tightness in my lower back that wasn't there before, but it's not too bad yet. Maybe I think to myself, that wasn't too bad. Maybe I'm going to get away with this. But then later that night, or maybe not even till the next morning, I get this sharp stabbing pain in my back. You know, that spasmy tweak that you get sometimes when you've been still, say you're moving from a sitting to a standing position or vice versa. And crap, somehow I did it. I tweaked my back. And depending on how bad this is, I'll be sidelined for a couple of days to a couple of weeks. And now I really, really wish that I had dropped that barbell. So I was improperly loaded, and certainly my movement was improper. Next up is muscle imbalance. And I suspect that a muscle imbalance may have played a role in Broc's injury. The vast majority of us are office workers these days, and we spend most of our days sitting, which is horrible for our bodies. This causes our hip flexors, basically our quads, our iliacus, and our psoas muscles to become tight, and our hip extensor muscles, which are think of your glutes and your hamstrings, as well as your abs, can become loose or weak from so much sitting. And this results in a muscle imbalance and a common condition known as lordosis. And what happens is your tight quads pull your hip girdle forward, and your looser, weak glutes and hamstrings further exacerbate this. So here's a simple way to demonstrate this. Stand with a neutral spine and put your hands on your hip bones. That's your pelvic girdle. Now, keeping the rest of your body motionless, tilt your hips forward, pause for a moment, and then come back to neutral. Now, do the same in the other direction. Tilt your pelvis back and then come back to that neutral position. Most of us find it's easier to rock forward. For many people, that is in fact their default position, with that hip girdle tilted forward. Here's another way of looking at it. Imagine that your hip girdle was a large bowl of steaming hot soup and it's filled to the brim. Any forward or backward tilt would allow that soup to spill on you. Now, with your hands on your hips, find that neutral position again. And again, without moving any other part of your body, find that perfect level spot where you wouldn't spill any of that scalding hot soup. How does that feel? Is that your default position? If not, you're in good company, but you may have a muscle imbalance. Keep in mind that although the hips are a very common area for distinct muscle imbalances, they can occur almost anywhere in the body. Next up on ways we commonly get injured is muscle weakness. And this is closely related to, if not the same as, improper loading. I once read an article that said the most common golf injury is a back injury. And I remember at the time thinking, well, that makes sense. I mean, golfers have a fairly explosive rotational movement they do quite often. But the article went on to say that the back injuries didn't come so much from swinging the club, but rather from bending over and picking up the ball. Now, I would submit that anyone who injures their back picking up a golf ball, or any other very light object for that matter, is probably experiencing something more akin to the straw that broke the camel's back. This person was an injury time bomb, just looking for the right trigger to full bore tweak their back. This scenario is greatly reduced for somebody who trains regularly and has a strong back. Improper warm-up is another common cause of injuries, especially as we age. Those of us over 50 should take time to warm up the major muscles we're preparing to use before intense exercise. And we should certainly build up to heavier loads as opposed to jumping right into the workout. We also see overuse as a common cause of injuries, and these often occur where people engage in activities with repetitive motions. Think swimmers or baseball pitchers in their shoulders, runners with their knees, ankles, or shin splints. And the last common cause of injury is overtraining, and in my experience, this can affect novices as well as workout veterans. But the bottom line is this: when we don't listen to our bodies and we push too hard, we're much more likely to get hurt. Okay, back to Broc and overcoming setbacks. I love his attitude. In his version of this, which you can listen to over on his podcast at midlifemasterypodcast.com, he stated, "Setbacks aren't a warning to play smaller. They're a message to play bigger." He understands that progress is rarely, maybe never, linear. It's almost always filled with ups and downs, peaks and valleys, but as long as the general direction is towards our goal, we're making headway. His perspective is that a weak back is more prone to injury and a strong back is more injury-proof, so he wants to double down on strengthening his back. And I love that attitude. But as a coach, I'm obviously very upset when a client gets injured or hurt. My job is to first and foremost keep these clients safe. So as a coach, here's how I handled the situation. First off, I told Broc not to do anything that his back didn't like, not even a little bit. He was worried about missing workouts, and I asked him not to worry about that at all. I wanted him to take care of A, his back, B, his daughter and family, and then we talked about some breathing techniques and some stress control, and then added some light mobility work in as his back started to improve. Broc is highly motivated and was eager to get back to hitting the weights, but I wanted to back up and ensure that we really focused on building his core, starting with some pretty basic movements. And so that's where we are today. Broc took about a week off from working out, and hopefully his life is getting back to somewhere to normal. I'm programming a lot of core stability and mobility movements, and we're slowly reintroducing the barbell at reduced weight and volume. So if you want to hear Broc's side of the story and follow him, check out midlifemasterypodcast.com, and I'll put all of his info into the show notes, including the link to his episode where he discusses this week from hell, and you can get his thoughts on overcoming adversity. Okay, so let's talk about our core. When most people think about the core, they think of the abs. They picture a person with a strong core as someone with six-pack abs. And while a six-pack can be a sign of a strong core, It's mostly associated with low body fat percentage. The core is more than just the abdominal muscles. The core is the center of the body and is responsible for the muscles that move both our hips and our shoulders, and it's made up with muscles in the front, sides, and rear of the body. Core muscles stabilize the spine, pelvis, and shoulder girdle, and they create a solid base of support for the powerful movements of your extremities. Having a strong, stable core is critical to athletic performance as well as injury prevention. Your core is activated in almost every athletic movement, from running and jumping to kicking and throwing, and in fact, it is involved in almost all human movement. You may have heard your core referred to as your powerhouse. You originate power in your core and you transfer that power from the center of your body to your extremities. Core strength and stability should be the very foundation of any strength and conditioning program. Okay, before we go any further, just a quick word on six-pack abs. Many of us equate, again, that strong core with the visible abs, like the ripped models on the cover of fitness magazines or on that Instagram account you follow. But the truth is that six-pack abs are much more a function of diet than they are of strength. If you look at any strongman competition, most of those competitors have insanely strong and capable cores, yet lack any visible six-pack definition at all. For our purposes here, we'll focus on building a strong, capable, injury-resistant core. And if you're interested in the aesthetics of six-pack abs, let me know and I'll cover that in a future Coach's Corner episode. Before we discuss the best way to strengthen our core, let's take a brief look at the major muscles that make up the core. There are essentially four main muscles that make up your core. The first group are your internal and external obliques. These are found on the outside of your core and they help flex the spine and aid in twisting as well as bending side-to-side movements. There is the rectus abdominis, and these are the six-pack muscles and they aid in flexing the spine as in doing a sit-up or a crunch. The third set of muscles is the transverse abdominis. This is also abbreviated as TVA, and these are your deep core muscles, and they're located on the inside of your internal obliques and are critical for bracing and stabilizing the spine. And then finally, the erector spinae, these run along your spine and they assist in keeping your back straight and aid in rotational movements. Now, if you're interested in seeing a diagram of your core muscles, you can check out the show notes for this episode, which you can find at silveredgefitness.com/episode 67. But what is the best way to get a strong core? The typical prescription is often tons of sit-ups and crunches. And while these exercises can be helpful, they are not the most effective way to get a truly strong and capable core. To do this, you want to engage in exercises that strengthen the entire core. And remember that your core muscles are in the front, sides, and back of your body, basically everything from your hips to your chest. Below are a few of my favorite movements that are excellent for building a strong and capable core. Let's start with the bird dog. The bird dog is a simple exercise that most people can do. You start a bird dog on all fours, on your hands and knees. Then you brace your core, and keeping a neutral spine, you lift one hand and the opposite foot out until they're parallel with your trunk. Hold that for a moment and then slowly and with control return to all fours. Repeat on the other side, and that's one rep. These can be scaled down for deconditioned folks by doing one limb at a time. Next up are weighted carries, also known as suitcase carries, and these are often overlooked but are a fantastic set of exercises for building core musculature. In fact, these, along with offset marches and lunges, are my favorite exercises for the core. They are most commonly done by holding a heavy weight in one hand by your side and simply walking. You want to focus on standing tall and straight, keep your shoulders square, brace your core, and walk. Another great variation of this is to carry the weight overhead in one hand. You walk the prescribed number of steps in one direction, switch hands, and walk back. Next up are planks, and you're probably familiar with this exercise. Planks are an outstanding exercise and don't require any equipment and can be performed pretty much anywhere. The basic idea is to maintain a straight line from your ankles to your head and hold until your core begins to burn. Forward planks are the most common variation, but be sure to incorporate side planks as well. Next up are offset marches and lunges. I love these and I don't know why they're not more common. But you begin with a heavy object in one hand. A kettlebell is particularly well suited for this, but a dumbbell or any heavy object will do. You clean it into your front rack position, and if you're unfamiliar with the front rack position, this simply means you get your kettlebell up so that it's resting on the same shoulder as the hand that's holding the weight. Brace your core and stand tall. For marches, you'll pick up one foot and pull your knee high, and then lower it with control, and repeat with the other leg. You're basically walking in place with an exaggerated step. Work for the prescribed time or number of reps and then switch sides with the kettlebell and repeat. Lunges are similar. You clean the kettlebell to the front rack position and then you lunge either forward, backwards, or walking lunges with both legs. Once you complete the prescribed reps, switch the kettlebell over to the other shoulder and repeat. Again, a fantastic variation for these is to perform your marches or your lunges with that weight in a locked out overhead position. Next up is the deadlift, and this exercise, along with the squat, also often get overlooked when it comes to building true core strength. But simply put, heavy deadlifts work almost every major muscle in your body. The role of the core in the deadlift is primarily that posterior core or that back stabilization, so the muscles doing most of the work here are the erector spinae. And like the deadlift, the squat is often overlooked for its usefulness in building a strong core. But again, heavy squats engage both the erector spinae and the external oblique musculature and are responsible for keeping that proper position as we come up out of the bottom of a squat. Your core muscles are built for endurance, not so much for maximum strength, so it's best to increase reps or time as your strength improves. Having a strong core translates to greater athletic ability, as well as greatly reducing your chance of injury. If core exercises aren't part of your current routine, consider adding some of the exercises above. Okay, let's talk about fat. In my first Coach's Corner, I talked about protein, and the last time I covered carbohydrates, so I thought it only fitting to bring up fats in this episode. Most of us over 50 remember a time when fat was out of vogue. We were told to fear fat because it would raise our cholesterol levels and, well, it would make us fat. Fast forward to present day, and we now know that not only are fats not bad for us, they are vital to healthy aging. Fat really has 6 major roles. Fat provides us with energy. In fact, fat is the most energy-dense macronutrient. Fat assists in making and balancing hormones. Fat forms our cell membranes. Fat forms much of our brain and nervous system. Fat is responsible for transporting fat-soluble vitamins. And finally, fat provides us with essential fats that our bodies can't produce on their own. So, how much fat should you eat? A healthy person should strive to get about 20 to 30% of their daily calories from healthy fat sources. In practical terms, this means a minimum of 1 to 2 servings of healthy fat per meal. As mentioned above, fat is the most energy-dense macronutrient. Fat provides 9 calories per gram, whereas carbohydrates and protein provide 4 calories per gram, so a little goes a long way. Okay, so when we talk about fat, I suppose we need to take some time and talk about omega-3 fatty acids and omega-6 fatty acids. So once upon a time in our ancestral past, we would have consumed about 2 parts of omega-6 fatty acids for every 1 part omega-3 fatty acid. You fast forward to today, and that healthy ratio of 2 to 1 has skyrocketed to about 20 to 1 in most Western diets. Omega-3 fats are anti-inflammatory and omega-6 fats are pro-inflammatory. And while we need both, we want to ensure that our ratios are closer to that optimal 2 parts omega-6 to 1 part omega-3 ratio. Omega-6 fats are found in vegetable oils, grain-fed meat and eggs, farmed fish, and in almost all of our heavily processed food. Greatly reducing processed foods and swapping out conventional grain-fed meats and eggs for 100% grass-fed alternatives is the first step towards reducing the inflammatory effects of omega-6 fats. Regularly including wild-caught oily fish like salmon, mackerel, and sardines will also greatly help. Another common step to restoring that 2-to-1 ratio is to supplement with fish oil. There are a ton of options out there, and just know that not all fish oils are created equal. I really like Labdoor.com. They stack rank supplement brands, and they have an entire section on fish oils, and I'll drop a link to that in the show notes. But the main thing that you're looking for in a fish oil supplement is the EPA and the DHA content. You'll often see things like flaxseed or flaxseed oil marketed as a good source of omega-3 fats. But flax contains mainly ALA and has a very poor conversion to EPA and DHA, so your best bet is really to stick with fish oil. Or better yet, you can cut out the middleman and supplement with algae, specifically spirulina or chlorella. Again, just make sure you do your homework and get a premium quality product. I had Catherine Arnston on the podcast a little over a month ago, I think, and she's the CEO and Chief Science Officer of Energy Bits, which is a company that makes high-quality algae, and I'll add a link to that podcast episode in the show notes as well. Okay, so that brings us to the question of which fats should you eat? Most of the fats you should eat should be polyunsaturated or monounsaturated fats, and basically these are primarily found in nuts, seeds, avocado, and fish. Choosing foods that are low in saturated fats can help you reduce your risk of heart disease, and you'll want to strive for a variety of healthy fats in your diet. And if possible, try to get fish and meat that are wild-caught or 100% pasture-raised and 100% grass-fed and grass-finished. Greatly reduce or eliminate refined and processed foods containing industrially produced fats and artificially hydrogenated fats. Okay, so what might that look like? Here's a list of some healthy fats that you'll want to include in your diet, some you'll want to restrict, and some you should probably avoid. So let's start with foods that you should eat more of, some of these healthy fats. They're things like extra virgin olive oil, your avocado and avocado oil, egg yolks would fall into this, walnut oil, cheese aged over 6 months is a great source of healthy fat. Your seeds like chia, flax, hemp, pumpkin, sesame, etc. All of your nuts, your cashews, your pistachios, almonds, Brazil nuts, pecans, etc. Olives, your nut butters that don't include hydrogenated oils, palm oils, and sugar. And fresh unprocessed coconuts, another great source of healthy fat. Things you're probably going to want to use in moderation would be things like coconut oil and milk. That's a pretty common one. Dark chocolate often gets touted for its health benefits as a healthy fat. You probably want to restrict that a little bit. Your virgin and light olive oils, your expeller pressed canola oil, sesame oils, flaxseed oils. These are things you should probably use in moderation, and things you should probably avoid in the fat arena are fairly obvious. They're bacon, sausage, etc. Your butter, your margarine, your processed cheese, all of your vegetable oils, your corn oil, your cottonseed oil, sunflower seed oil, canola oil, soybean oil, on. And certainly any kind of shortening or hydrogenated oils and trans fats. Okay, that's enough about fat for right now. Let's move along. I want to talk about a book I read recently in preparation for an interview with Dr. Kien Vu. The book is called Thrive State, Your Blueprint for Optimal Health, Longevity, and Peak Performance. Again, that's by Dr. Kien Vu. And it seemed only appropriate for me to review this book as I just had him on the podcast a few weeks ago. This book is a great book for anyone interested in holistic health and longevity. Dr. Vu opens with his own personal transformation story. Long story short, he found himself as a practicing doctor giving his patients advice that he himself wasn't following. And as a result, he ended up very unhealthy. He was overweight, he had high blood pressure, had type 2 diabetes, and he had medication for all these things. So he decided to take matters into his own hands, and within a relatively short amount of time, he reversed these chronic illnesses. And this caused him to take a deep dive into chronic disease and how modern medicine, quote unquote, treats these diseases. And what he found out is that modern medicine does nothing to treat or cure these chronic diseases. Rather, they recommend pills and sometimes surgeries to alleviate the symptoms of these diseases while ignoring the root cause of the problem. And eventually he realized that you are your own best medicine and that the doctor of the future is you. So, having placed responsibility for our own health back where it belongs, namely on us, Dr. Vu came up with what he calls his 7 bioenergetic elements, which are sleep, nutrition, exercise, stress and emotions, mindset, relationships, and purpose. The book dedicates a chapter to each of these elements and gives some great practical tips for improving in each of these areas. And then he finishes by explaining how all 7 of these elements are tied together. And in order to truly thrive, that is, reach your thrive state, you need to have mastery in each of these 7 bioenergetic elements. This book was a great read, very accessible, very informative. Now, if you just want the Cliff Notes version, you can listen to my podcast and I'll drop a link into the show notes, which you can find again at silveredgefitness.com/episode 67. But if you want the deep dive into this, I strongly recommend you read the book. Again, that's Thrive State, Your Blueprint for Optimal Health, Longevity, and Peak Performance by Dr. Kien Vu. I'll also drop a link to that in the show notes. Okay, coming into the home stretch here. In case you missed them, here's a recap on my last few podcast guests, as well as my main takeaway for each of them. About 3 weeks ago, I spoke with Debbie Krall. Debbie is a 64-year-old author, speaker, personal trainer, and nutrition coach, and she's worked with everyone from pro athletes to full-on couch potatoes. And an offhand remark by a relative at a family get-together forever changed the arc of her life. At the time, she was a 2-pack-a-day smoker, and she drank a 6-pack of Dr. Pepper daily. She went on to become a fitness professional and competitive bodybuilder, and today she's in fantastic shape. Debbie is very active on social media, and one of the main things that impressed me is not only just how strong she is, but how flexible and mobile she is. One of my favorite quotes from our interview is when she says, quote, "Yoga is really important to me. That's made me stronger. The weights haven't made me stronger. The joint endurance has made me stronger because you can only lift as strong as your joints are. And yoga has made me a lot stronger." End quote. I think that this is critical for those of us over 50, and it's often ignored. But Debbie goes on to make a strong case for the importance of working on flexibility and mobility as we age. 2 weeks ago, I spoke with Dr. Kien Vu, but we pretty well covered him in the book review section just a minute ago. But my main takeaway from speaking with Dr. Vu is the importance of relationships and purpose, not only to our emotional and mental well-being, but how these are actually critical to our medical health as well. My latest episode was with former Miss USA Gretchen Jensen. And going into this interview, I had little, as in none, knowledge about beauty pageants. And Gretchen gave us a very unique behind-the-scenes look at this world. And her journey was surprising to me. I had just assumed that she grew up doing these beauty pageants as a child, but that wasn't the case at all. I won't give away any spoiler alerts here in case you haven't listened to the episode yet, but my key takeaway from speaking with Gretchen is how beauty emanates from the inside. Beauty starts from being healthy and confident. It starts with self-acceptance and self-love. I don't think it would be a stretch to say that a good place in starting to develop inner beauty would be to level up in all of Dr. Vu's 7 bioenergetic elements. Okay, as we wrap up, I want to thank you so much for listening and let you know that I'm very excited about some of my future guests. I have had some fantastic conversations with some amazing human beings, and I'm really excited to share them with you. I spoke with Gene Dykes, aka the Ultra Geezer. Gene is a 73-year-old world record ultra runner. I had a beautiful conversation with Julia Olson. Julia is a 64-year-old childhood diabetic, double organ transplant and triple cardiac transplant survivor with an amazing transformation story. And I promise that you'll be uplifted and inspired by her story and her outlook on life. Let's see, I spoke with Dr. Stefan Zavalin. He's a movement enthusiast and work culture consultant, and we spoke about the dangers of sitting, and he gives those of us who are office workers some great advice on breaking the cycle of excessive sitting. Let's see, who else? Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. So I spoke with Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, and if you don't know her, she's on the forefront of muscle-centric medicine, and she explains the importance of protein and resistance training as we age, and why muscle is the organ of longevity. You definitely don't want to miss this one. And most recently, I recorded an interview with Andy Baker. Those of you who have been around for a while may remember way back, I think it was episode 16, I did an interview with Dr. Jonathan Sullivan. And that episode is, to this day, one of the most popular. Dr. Sullivan is the co-author of a book called The Barbell Prescription: Strength Training for Life After 40. And Dr. Sullivan's co-author on that book was Andy Baker. And Andy is one of the most sought-after strength and fitness experts in the industry. And we talk all about what exercises are best for those of us over 50 and exactly how we can program these exercises for optimal safety and effectiveness. I'll drop all of these folks' social media info into the show notes. Again, that's silveredgefitness.com/episode 67 in case you want to get a sneak peek at these folks before their actual episodes air. Well, that's our show for today, folks. I'll put links to everything we talked about in the show notes, and once again, you can find that over at silveredgefitness.com/episode 67. And don't forget to check out silveredgefree.com for more great free resources on how to live your healthiest, strongest life after 50. I'll be back later this week with an interview with Gene Dykes. And if you've ever wondered what it's like to run a 200-plus mile race in your 70s, you won't want to miss this episode. Thanks so much for spending your time with me today, and until next time, stay strong.